you flew off.
I think he just spent it.
Well, it'll make it a true Chautauqua.
Yeah, that's
A few
true.
bugs around.
All right, Karen, whenever you're ready.
Look how dramatically the shadows are cast here. Is that, that's amazing. That's not the shadow. It is the shadow.
What color are you seeing?
Yellow, very pronounced
Oh,
yellow
yeah.
on the floor. Hmm. Okay. Let me know when we're good.
We are.
One thing I think a visitor to Chautauqua would notice right away is they see the Osborne name all over, on the water fountain and the history book. And tell me about your family's involvement.
Well, you would see paintings that my father did too, his name on his paintings. But we've been around a long time, and my father came here, I don't know, around 1910 or 12, and at that time, the Osborne family were educators, and most of them were public school administrators, teachers, and my grandfather George Osborne died when my father was in his teens. So my grandmother was a widow until she married Judge Flanagan in 1925, which was the year I was born, and that's when they bought the cottage that I own now.
So when Judge Flanagan was also a Chautauquan?
Yes, he was on the board of directors, and he was from East St. Louis, and he was a widower, and they both owned cottages, and they sold their individual cottages and bought what they called Happy Court. That was the name that they gave to it.
Tell me about the waterfall.
Well, that was something that after my father retired, and he bought his cottage on Jersey Avenue in Chautauqua, and I had, even though his book says I bought mine in 1957, it was really 1951. But anyway, I was in town and he was not. He was traveled, and he was superintendent of schools in Northern Illinois, and he also worked for a publishing company for 10 years after his retirement from schools. So when we bought it, we just called it Arrowhead, and we were married in 1950. I was recalled. I was in World War II, naval officer, and I came back after the Korean conflict. We were married before I went, and then we bought the cottage. My grandmother's still living, and she and my wife, Hilda, got along very well. So
They shared the home.
and she helped with the children, and we lived together very happily, and we told her she could have her room as long as she lived, as long as she wanted. And she did that until she bought her home in St. Petersburg, Florida.
What did the name Arrowhead mean to you?
That was the shape of our lot, our leasehold. You know, the corner you go around there.
Mm-hmm.
It's round on one end and straight on the other.
Now, it says Ralph Osborne Memorial out here. Tell us about that.
Well, when he bought his cottage and when he was here, well, then he wanted to do something in honor of his mother and the family. And I was on the board of directors at the time with Bill Can of Bank Building Equipment, and he was, of course, an architect, and he agreed to make the design and supervise the construction of it, and my father paid for it.
How much of it is due to the Osbornes? The waterfall?
Well, the
Is that
stone was
right?
there, but the pump and the waterfall was put in, and then he did build the fountain and dedicated that to his mother, and he did the stonework around the plaque that is the marble plaque. And then 2 years ago, he died in 1998. Well, the contributions to the LCIA Memorial Fund were used to purchase the plaque. That was it.
Were you there the day the time capsule was buried?
Yes, I was.
Where exactly is the time capsule? Let's assume that 100 years from now, someone's looking at this interview we're doing, and they want to find the time capsule.
It's under the marble, it was buried, and I was here when they put the marble plaque on top of it.
And what's in it?
I don't know, it was a secret.
You weren't part of the people who packed the capsule, huh?
No, I didn't.
What has Chautauqua meant to your family over the years?
Way of life. It's been our life. It's what we've looked forward to, and I enjoy going up here, and my grandmother did a lot of things to help me in Chautauqua, and I figured if I could do the same thing to help our grandchildren and bring them along in the same way that I had the opportunity, well then that's what I want to do. And as it is, each of our 4 children have loved Chautauqua as much as my wife, and their spouses. The ones that are married on, their spouses love it just as much as the rest of us. So it's been something to look forward to. Every year round. Well, we don't want to live here around the year, but we want to be here in the summer because it gave us the opportunity to be part of the community, have the activities structured for children, for all ages and adults. And it gave us an organization that would be much better than, as you know, we can drive up and down the Mississippi and up to Illinois and see places where people live. They get out in the country and they can barbecue or do what they want to, but they don't have the community spirit. They don't have the structure that we have. And I believe that community, people, activities, and location probably comes last because there are a lot of locations. There are many. I don't think they're as good for me as this one is. So we really have it all here from my viewpoint. And I started out at Chautauqua because I had grandparents that lived both in Alton. Both of them lived in Alton. And if I could be at Chautauqua before we had air conditioning, and the 10 degrees cooler here, and at least I could get a night's sleep. If I had a choice of which grandmother I wanted to be with, I'd be with the one here at Chautauqua.
Yeah. Count off the generations of Osborns who've enjoyed Chautauqua.
Well, it'd just be the George Angie Osborne Flanagan, my grandmother, and my father, Ralph Osborne. Of course, his brother and wife used to come up. He was superintendent of schools in East St. Louis, and so they would come up on numerous occasions, and Lucille Osborne, and then my family, Bill and Hilda, and then we have Barbara Russell and her husband, 3 children. David Osborne, his wife Vicki, and they have 2 children, girls. And then there'd be Robert, who has his law practice in Clayton, and Barb, and their son Nicky, and Barb had 3 sons, Corey, Jesse, and Ryan Palmer. And that's it.
Well, but that's
And
quite a bit. We're
then
talking
then we have
grandparents,
our-
parents, you, your children, and their children. That's 5 generations of Osborns.
Mm-hmm. Then we have James, no children.
How many families do you think around here have 5 generations that have enjoyed Chautauqua?
Well, there are a few. There are a few.
And why would that happen? Why would the
Be-
other kids say, oh, you know, we're going to vacation in Florida or we're going to go to someplace else? Why would 5 generations of a family come back to the same spot?
Well, it's because it's family oriented. If the parents liked it, and if the children liked it as they grew up, well, they'd come back. Some of them didn't like it.
What's the difference? I know people either love it or they don't understand it. What's the difference between people who love Chautauqua and those who don't?
It might be determined by what they can give back to Chautauqua, what they can contribute, how they can use their talents, and how they are willing to share them. And maybe, you know, there's an old saying about people that want to move into a new city, and they go around and ask, well, are the people nice here? Is this a good place to live? And they say, well, how was it where you came from? And they say, oh, it was wonderful there. Well, then this will be just as wonderful. But if they say, oh, we didn't like it there at all, well, you probably won't like it here.
That's a good story. That's a great story. One of the contributions of your family was to purchase a parsonage for the minister. And
Yes.
why was that?
Well, in my father's book, one of his conclusions was that maybe what would keep Chautauqua going and would make this one perhaps different than the rest would be a continued firm Christian outlook, a ministry that would be important to the community. But when he and I incorporated the church after the reorganization, the church was incorporated not as a church, but as a foundation, a 203 foundation, which is broader than just religious. And so in order to, when the Chautauqua Board had been providing derelict cottages that couldn't be sold or rented to a minister to induce a student minister to come, well, that didn't really work too well. Maybe it was better to sell the cottage and keep one that they could use. And this was a cottage that was in need of repair, and he worked with the board. The board contributed the leasehold to the church, and in turn, he spent the money to renovate it. And he did a lot of work himself. He hired some people to do it. He got to the point where he couldn't finish it, so I ended up finishing it.
Sounds like a lot has fallen to you to finish of your father's projects.
Well, he was creative. He was talented. He was the artist. He was the liberal arts person, and I managed his money and paid the bills.
What are your fondest memories as a young person of Chautauqua?
Well, Dr. Zimmerman called me and asked me what I remembered about Bill Clarkson, because he knew that when I was growing up here, Bill Clarkson was one of the fellows that we bumped around together. And there were four of us. There was Jack Jacoby, Carl Hershey, and Bill Clarkson. Four of us ran around. And then we also did, Walt Riesedick was just a little younger, but I did a lot of things with Walt and his sister. So those were the people that I remember most. And when we were married, well, Jack Jacoby was in the wedding. Carl Hershey was best man. And we all had come back from the military. Bill Clarkson didn't.
Oh. When you were a kid getting in trouble and
I didn't get any trouble.
you didn't get in any trouble? You never, ever had a wild adventure here?
Bill Clarkson and I were both guys that took turns working at the administration office, answering the one phone, and we would get paid 10 cents for each call that we had to deliver a message for.
Tell us how that worked, because a lot of people won't know. I mean, they just figure you have a cottage, you have a phone.
Mm-hmm.
But what was it like?
I don't know how a person with a cell phone could have lived up here. And it was private. It was okay. But again, when a call would come, we'd take it up. If there was a movie going, we'd take it to the auditorium, and there would be an announcement that so-and-so has a call, and they'd go back and come to the phone, and we would give them the number, or we would deliver the number to them if they were in the audience, and then that's the number that they would call back. It was a payphone. It just stood there, and we answered it.
So you were paid just to hang out near the phone and pick it up when it rang?
That's right, just like we have bell ringers now.
What years are we talking about?
Oh, 36, 37, up until 43. At the time that we bought our cottage in 51, well, we had the third telephone on the grounds. And then when I was on the board of directors in I guess it was 65 in that era, well, helped get the telephone lines buried, so everybody had a telephone. And I got the gas company, got the board to get the gas company to approve putting in gas lines to every cottage. That's when we began getting a little more modern.
Well, okay, so you tell me you were never mischievous, you never got in any trouble, but what did you do for fun? What did you and your pals do? Today,
Well, I was president of the Audubon Bird Society, so we had meetings in the morning, and we would go on the trail and see the birds, and had good instruction. And we had horses, stable. We used to go horseback riding. We had boats. We always had some kind of a boat. Jack Jacoby and I used sailboats. His father ended up getting a Higgins powerboat, and we'd use it and learn to water ski. Did a lot of water work. Every afternoon we went swimming. We had movies 3 or 4 times a week. Every Saturday night there was a movie and then a dance. After that, we were very busy.
Sounds like it.
We played in the creek too. And then we would take in the afternoon, sometimes we'd take a picnic lunch and walk up top the bluff, climb the bluffs and have a picnic on either bluff, either side. And we used to ride the horses up Centennial Trail. And every once in a while we got a hold of a parent's car when we got a little older. 1940, we were all driving, borrowing cars.
And where would you go?
Well, in those days, we had, go up to Grafton. We'd go into Alton, but it wasn't, we didn't have the river road then. It was a little more difficult. Sometimes we just go to Elsa.
Was Hilda a Chautauqua person too?
No.
And how did you introduce her to Chautauqua?
She didn't live here, but she knew about it, and she had come here with her parents when she was younger. And so she was very acceptable to it. Her parents had a farm, and I think they sold that. They did buy a cottage here. Mother and father had a cottage, which was Pollahans.
Oh, that's nice.
They owned that for quite a
Could
while.
you have married a girl who didn't love Chautauqua?
No. If they don't like it, well, they wouldn't really probably be welcome, and I would have had to go someplace else.
To look for love or to look for a summer home?
Something that she wanted. But we were both, we were 24 when we were married, and she was a school teacher, and I had a position that I was very happy with. She was happy, but we were happier together, and she knew my love for Chautauqua. I brought her up here, and she said, hey, this is it. And she was the same way about Florida. We bought a home in Fort Lauderdale in 1954, 4 years after we were married. And we always used it.
Do you feel like Chautauqua has kept your family together, or that's not quite what I mean. I mean, of course your family be together, but does it bring your family, does it enhance your family
Yes.
life?
Yes.
How so?
Because we like the same things here. And our oldest, our daughter Barbara, well, we only live 15 miles from here in Godfrey for our winter home. And whenever she wanted to get a loan, or she wanted to renew or have a meditation, or she wanted to think about things other than school and other pressing things, well, she would come up here. As soon as she could drive, well, she would come up here by herself. She had a large dog. We wouldn't let her go by herself
In today's world, though, how far does Barbara come to bring her family here?
from Fort Lauderdale, 1,250 miles.
And why
And
would she
her
do that?
husband loves it. Her husband loves it. Her children love it. They don't really like to go back to Florida. None of them.
Why would they go to so much trouble?
I think it's the opportunities that they've had here. They like the outdoors, the wild animals, the being able to be independent here and not, you can get away, but you don't have to go very far. They like nature, wildlife. Our daughter would go out and pick blackberries. She knows all the flowers, and they like the different colors of change of the season. They miss
Which they miss in Fort Lauderdale.
winter.
Okay, great, Bill. That's been so helpful. That will add a lot to our tape. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Great, it was
Okay.
interesting.
Glad to talk to you about it.
Fun.
I know you're not always down there during the day, and you're just a block and a half
Rarely,
away over there.
Rarely. You know, it's just, when we're down there, it's like,
Oh,
glasses,
oh,
case,
absolutely. I
and
knew you'd
pen
want to
out
do
of
that,
your
and I just
pocket,
forgot about
you'll be
that. That's
happier.
fine. Oh, sure.
Rolling tape.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Tell me what your interest was in doing this history project. Why did you think we should do this?
Oh, wow. I really feel that Chautauqua has a history that sometimes needs to be shared with people. Partly the people who are already here, partly those who are not here. I think Gary Cooper probably brought it out as much as anybody in one of our town hall meetings, where he said, you know, 15 years from now, today is going to be the good old days. And I thought that was such a good way of putting it, because it says each of us has a different perspective. You've interviewed quite a number of people already, I know, and their childhood experiences, then to their near adult and later adult phase. Each of those is going to impress upon them a different set of images at the time. And of course, as in my role and as being a member of the board of directors over most of the last 22 years, I've seen how different people will come in and say, well, you know, we want it like it used to be. So a tape like this, vignettes of different people being able to sort of talk about some of their experiences, will hopefully give new people, as well as those of us here, a different perspective. Because we don't, even though we share a lot, we don't always share it in the sense of, well, let's just talk about what happened to me when I was 12 years old, or what happened here. And so maybe this will bring out a little elicitation of that a little more.
If you were describing this to someone who hadn't been here, can you just physically describe, Bob, how it sets with the river and the bluffs and just
Well,
paint
you
that
know,
word
the
picture?
strange thing is that we talk about, you get an physical orientation. You sort of think of north-south as the actual road through here, and but the river, I guess, really more so. But the river is really almost running east-west at this point. So really, truly, the road through Chautauqua is running north-south. And when I talk about this to some people, as a matter of fact, I'd invited some friends of mine to come up here today, and I said, you know, you're coming up the river road, you know, you're going to go past Elsa. If you get to Raging Rivers, you've gone too far, and you look for this sort of simulated lighthouse, and you know, set back in the valley and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, to me, that's the uniqueness in a way about Chautauqua. It's sort of set back.
And how did the bluffs and the river play into forming this topography here?
Well, I think that the bluffs truly frame. You've got two fairly nice columns, if you will, on either side, and they're not too covered with foliage, particularly. For some reason, those two piece parts happen to not have as much tree growth and whatnot. So you can pretty much say, you know, look for the framed area that really sets it out. I mean, when I was a kid, and long before the River Road was put in, because that was 1962 or so, the defining characteristic of Chautauqua was you would be on the road, or what was then the old railroad tracks, without the tracks. They were gone. And it would be a hot day, or hot night, particularly a hot night, and a bunch of us kids would be coming back from like Elsa or somewhere, and all of a sudden it would be like hitting a cool wall of air. Just, it was ultimately defined. And my dad used to say that barge operators would know when they were going by Chautauqua also because that cool air just flowed on out to about the middle of the river before it finally dissipated. So,
Now, why would Chautauqua have that phenomenon that Elsa does not seem to have, Grafton does not have? Or does Elsa?
Well,
I
I
don't
don't
know.
know that they do. They probably have it to some degree, but I think it's the fact that our valleys go so much further back, and we're actually being fed by at least two different tributaries, the one up Springfield and then the one on up Jersey, and that particularly now that we're in August, you get the fact that the sun is starting to go down behind the hills, if you will, a little earlier, not quite as much sun, so that flow starts happening sooner, let alone the fact that a day like today is cooler, a little bit anomalous. But I think it tends to be that. I mean, obviously the other side of that is when you have lots of trees, you have lots of water vapor, and so you get the cool dampness that some people can like and some people can not like.
How do you think the first founders of Chautauqua found this pretty piece of land?
Well, from what I've read or heard, I think it was as much that...
Yeah, I'm not implying you were one of those founders.
No. I'm not quite that old, gray hair notwithstanding. No, I think it was that we know that it was a meeting ground for Indians because of the spring. And one vignette that I did hear, one story I did hear just this summer sort of plays to that point, that a group came here, saw the spring, thought it was a nice place, and then I think it's a Methodist group, then bought the land or set it up as a meeting ground, and of course the term Chautauqua meaning meeting ground or meeting place, that it became that for the last part of the 19th century. So I think it was the semblance of the pristineness. I'm sure it was quiet at that time because there probably clearly would not have been much here, and just the ambiance, I guess, would have done it.
Are we waiting for that to kick off?
No,
Is
it's
it
not
okay?
that bad,
Okay.
no.
When did you first become part of Chautauqua, and what are your earliest memories of being here?
For me, it was the summer of 1953. My dad, I guess one day said, well, we're going to spend 2 weeks at some place called Chautauqua. As I remember, he said, if you want to take a friend, and I grew up in Jerseyville, only 15 miles away. He said, if you want to take a friend, tell me who, and it was a friend of mine, Don Lasher. So he and I and my parents came up here and stayed at a cottage not very far from here, what's now called Bluffside. And what my dad, who bought that cottage that fall, called Foothold because he was a podiatrist. And so it was sort of play on words, of course. And what I remember most strikingly was I wanted to call this Bicycle City, because at the time you just drove through here or walked through here and you just saw bicycles everywhere. And it was, I guess, my first introduction to the more English, what we call them, the English racer bicycle, or the narrow-wheeled bicycles were just coming into vogue, I suppose. Maybe they'd been around, but that was my first exposure to them. But starting in 53, then or 54, I guess that would really be, started coming up on a round-the-year basis or summer basis, but my parents liked to come up on the weekends. And as a matter of fact, there was almost as much fun out of season as there was in season. In those days, you would have the lights go out at 10 o'clock. So if you would visit after season, there were no street lights, because it was not expected that people really needed to have a lot of safety factors. No highway at the river road. We were very, very isolated with only this back, what we now call the back entrance, but that was the main entrance at the time. And as a result, maybe it was a matter of saving money, I'm not sure. But when you go to visit folks, you would always take flashlights so that you could, if you stayed late, and we almost always did, you could get your way back home, because this area is really very dark unless it's a moonlit night. So you could easily trip over things. So I would say that was, the early memories were the summer fun, but the out-of-season get-togethers with people like the Polsters and others, where you'd go play cards, or the Jacobys. Just, tons of us would get together, have a little dinner on a Saturday night, have some fun, just getting together. And then you go back to your home for the...
And this would be parents and children, right?
Yes, or at least in my case. Now, I don't know whether that was an anomaly, or whether that was, I would say, every time it happened, my parents and I would go somewhere. It was not just the parents leaving us by ourselves. Now, there were times, particularly after season, when right across the street from us at the shuffleboard courts, we used to play capture the flag. And we'd have lots of back and forth and sneaking around and all that kind of stuff. So we did a lot of things ourselves. This is probably going to sound like an old fogey, but as I already said, I'm not. But I would say probably one of the best summers I had as what would that be, really a sub-teenager, 53 to 50 to 60, was the summer we didn't have a pool. They reconstructed the pool, I think it was in the summer of 57, might have been 56, except for like the last week. Mm-hmm. And it really forced all of us to get into, what can we do? Because I'm sure we were driving our parents crazy, just like, okay, where are you going to take me next? But we would do things like, we found a cave, more or less a crevice in the rock up near, towards Grafton, and so we wound up building a fort up there, and we'd go up there, and then we'd just have truly harmless fun. I mean, honest Injun, it was harmless. And but that was really great stuff. It's just like an adventure. You do those things, and you think of things to do, and then we'd get, when the pool was finally back, then we were back swimming again. And of course, the good thing, a transition between the old pool and the new pool, was the fact that the old pool was filled with water every week from the spring and the well. So it started off somewhere between 48 and 52 or so on I'm pretty sure it was like a Monday afternoon. I think they drained the pool right at the end of the day, Sunday, as fast as they could, and then came right back and filled it up with the spring water, so that by the end of the week, the temperature, if you were lucky, and it was a good 4th of July week, would almost maybe be up 76 to 78, maybe 80 once in a great while. But it was so cold on some days that the old pool had a concrete ridge lip around the outside edge of it. And a bunch of us kids, we always used to play a game called Shark, where you dive into the water on a corner of the pool and try and get around a person who was the shark. If he touched you, then you were the shark for a while. And of course, if it's cold water, you don't want to be a shark any longer than necessary. So what we'd do is we'd splash water out of the pool, and because there were some low spots, they'd warm up. So we'd go over there and we'd be sitting in this little pool of warm water, brackish maybe, but we'd kind of just splash on ourselves to get warm again, and then we'd go back and play the game. So.
How old were you then? 10?
I would have been around 10, yeah, 56 to 58 time frame. I was 10 and 56. So.
What about the creek? Wasn't that attractive to you?
Oh
as a
yeah,
little boy?
that was fun. I mean, I think it's something that you see, we still see. Let's build a dam. Let's get the water up a little bit. Eventually a flash flood will take most of it out, and that's okay. But it was kind of a rallying point also in the 50s or when I was a kid.
How close do you think Chautauqua has come to folding?
Ooh. From a financial point of view?
Well,
Or-
I'm thinking, how close was it the Air Force might have taken it over?
Oh.
How hard was the rebuilding after the 93 flood? What about the
Okay.
reorganization?
I to the degree that as an 8-year-old I can tell you about the Air Force Academy, what I basically remember of that is, of course, the discussion on the grounds, hearing about it, but not realizing the full import. But then Mr. Woodrow, who was the manager of the pool, a retired gentleman who always always had to check in with Mr. Woodrow before you'd get into the pool. I remember, and he would have a big megaphone, and at 4 o'clock, pool being 1 to 5, hours 1 to 5. At 4 o'clock, he'd say, 4 o'clock, 4 o'clock. And at 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock, all out, all out. Well, this one day, he picks up the megaphone and says, they chose Colorado Springs. And I mean, the place, it was just great because everybody knew what that really meant. It was not going to be here, and we were not going to have to give up Chautauqua as far as, the Air Force Academy. And I think they made a wise choice, having been there a few times.
What about the flood?
The 93 flood. Now, and there was a 73 flood, but it obviously was nowhere near as dramatic as that, like about 5 feet shorter. But the 93 flood, I would say, really was not a bad thing that happened to Chautauqua. It was almost a great thing that happened to Chautauqua. It let us really step back and say, here's some things that have happened to our physical infrastructure that we really need to take attention to. And honestly, it had been ignored longer than it should have been. So it gave us a real good reason to say, everyone here, we got to dig a little deeper, we got to make things right. And everybody went right along. I mean, that was, which is really to the second point. It was rallying. It said, we went through a major problem. Everybody knew it. And everybody said, we got to make this right because we don't want to lose Chautauqua. At least, whether people said that to me directly or just indirectly by their actions, I would say that the 93 flood was really a positive pivot point in the history of Chautauqua. And since then, I think we've been doing, as a board and as a community, building on that to improve things here, the water system. I can tell you that when we reorganized in the 80-81 time frame, and when I was first on the board, that there was a list of, here's the 10-year plan, and somewhere in the early 80s was to have been put a new water system in. So some things just unfortunately took longer than they should have, but I think we were on the verge of doing that around 92, 93. It just made things happen. A number of things happened a little sooner. The water was a little later even than that.
So when you were a little guy, 8 or 10 years old,
Mhm.
Your dad dragged you over here to spend the summer in this hot
Right.
place, and you're still coming back.
Right.
And you've married and brought your wife here.
Well,
and
she was here.
Tell us about that. This
Well,
is Chautauqua romance?
Yeah. Gee, so far back in time, I can't tell you why, when, or how. It's just all of a sudden, when I think I was either 12 or 13 and she was 11 or 12, we started seeing each other, or whatever the right phrase would be. And in those days, it wouldn't have been dating each other. And then in my high school days, we did date. And then late in college, we got married. That was it.
Did Chautauqua bring you together? Was she also from Jerseyville?
No, she was from St. Louis. She grew up in Normandy at the time, and that her parents both had worked at McDonnell Douglas, or McDonald, I guess, at the time. And as she tells me, her parents said, you've got a choice. You can either have a 2-week vacation somewhere, or you can have Chautauqua. And she and her sister consistently said, we want to be here. And so that's how we got to meet. And so I guess you'd say that as a result of that, it wasn't a matter of either of us trying to figure out whether the other liked Chautauqua. It was kind of a given. We already knew what it was about, at least from our perspective, and that we liked being here. So eventually, her parents sold their cottage to us, and my wife being a teacher, it made it very convenient that during the summer we could bring our kids. She would be here all summer with the kids. I'd be up on the weekends. Unfortunately, it's just, to me, a too far drive at times. But it made it very good for the kids. And I would say that my 2 kids really like Chautauqua. They're adults, they're married, they have kids now, and I think what's next in their minds is how can they get a place here? It hasn't happened yet, but I can see it with them. Whether it's our place at some point, I mean, we're loaning it to them a lot of the time, like with Children's Day and whatnot. But my son is saying, well, when are we going to expand into some other, some new areas of land opening up, things like that, because he wants to be able to buy some of that and build a place. So they're focusing on that.
Do you think that Chautauqua, the fact that your wife was a Chautauquan, made her more attractive to you? Do you think that Chautauqua played a part in your romance, or was it just chance that you both were Chautauquans?
I'm going to probably say it was just more chance. No negatives, no positives. It's just one of those two people come together and eventually they figure out it's okay.
Right. I think that's good, Bob. That was beautiful. This restaurant, you come upon it, and it's a stone wall with a heavy wooden gate or door, and you wouldn't know anything was there. Little tiny sign and column door. And you open the gates and go into this restaurant, and it's a huge stone terrace cantilevered out over these hillsides of lavender. And I don't know if you could see the ocean from there. I don't think so, but you're just
The
up.
lavender in Provence must be great because Tim and Rose sent me. Then go back to Paris and spend a few days there.
That sounds
that'll be
almost
it.
perfect.
Mhm.
You're going to come home with your eyes and mind so full.
All right, Karen, we're rolling tape.
Have you been to Provence before?
No, and that's been to Paris and have never been to Italy.
So that's
that
something you
I
really want to
was
achieve.
fascinated with Peter Mail's books. Have you read some of them?
I read only the first one.
Well, I've just read.
Year in Provence.
I've read the rest of,
Mhm.
maybe 5 or 6
And then
or
did you
more of
read
his books.
Frances, what's her name? Frances Mail's book about Under the Tuscan Sun and
Oh, I read some of that.
similar experience, but
Yes,
hers
I
was
read
in
some of
Italy.
that. My sister has that book. And when I was visiting her in California, I picked up that book. And yes, it did remind me.
Well, obviously, those are wonderful trips, but we're here to talk about
Yes,
something
we
much
are.
closer to home.
Mhm.
So, a world traveler like yourself, when you have, but you have the opportunity, and you could choose to live anywhere, Helen, and you choose Chautauqua. Why?
Chautauqua has this very special quality of closeness that is really intriguing. Part of it is the association with my childhood and youth, so it's like being at home. I mean, it is being at home. But I think the charm of it originally came just because of all the people here in this very pretty setting, this valley that has great beauty.
How would
And-
you describe this area to someone who didn't know it?
I would say that first of all, you have to be, you're surrounded by trees, and that is very wonderful to me. I couldn't live where there weren't many beautiful trees. Also, that you do have the cliffs. So there are trees coming out of the cliffs. There are cliffs rising out of the river. And then this valley that is in a cleft of these little mountains that just draws you right on back. Then there's the spring and the creek, of course. The waterfall is not part of it. The waterfall is not natural, but it does add charm. So I don't know whether that would be a good description. That also, I think you have to include in the description these very unusual little homes.
How did they come to be?
Well, there's the Chautauqua, New York, which this is patterned from. These cottages are nowhere near as elegant as the Chautauqua, New York cottages, but it's the same kind of idea of the porch. The porch is this little central living area, but the porches are where we live, and not nearly as much as we used to since we have air conditioning now. It's changed our lives. But people sat on their porches, and I still do. And folks walk by, and you hope they look in and see you, and they do, and sometimes come in and chat, but just wave. So there's that sense of being part of everyone else's life. And part of that, I think, is the openness of the porches.
There seems to be almost a protocol about when you say hello and how you approach, and do you sense that, and can you put it in words?
When you say hello.
Would it be tacky to yell at somebody who's in their house, or?
No, not at all. And people do that. You know, they go by. I could be in my kitchen and someone walks past the front of my house and sees me, and they wave or they shout. And that's fine. I welcome that. It's really a camaraderie that you have with everyone that people tend not to do in a city. You pretend not to notice someone because you don't want to destroy their privacy. So, no, I think there's certainly times if you would see that people are doing something that maybe they'd just as soon not talk about, then of course you wouldn't get their attention. But ordinarily, no. Say hello anytime. Or just come in, or knock at the door and walk in. Friend of mine, Charlie Meyer, the other day had something to bring back to me. I think it was butter. And I was in my bedroom finishing dressing, and Charlie was at the door. I didn't hear her. When I didn't answer, she just walked in, thinking I wasn't there. And she had intended to come back and put the butter in my refrigerator. But I saw her as she walked through, and it didn't bother her or me that she was coming into my house without being invited to put away the butter. So that's just
The way it is.
It's the way it is. Mhm.
What's the significance of being here on the Mississippi?
Oh, I think there's something about this big river that's so fascinating. It's such a big river, and it's so major in our United States. It's muddy, and there are parts of it that aren't, because of the mud, aren't beautiful. But there's the
There's the
I'm
fun.
trying not to touch it.
But
I
it changes color every day, it seems.
Yeah, I've gotten to be a river person, never was until I came here. I think just being out in the river in a boat is a lot of fun. The sky is marvelous. The sunsets are spectacular when the river reflects the sunset. I've seen some of the most beautiful ones here. And right at this spot, several years ago, I was standing looking at the sunset. I was out at the entrance. I had stopped my car to stay there and look at it. And this can only happen at certain times of the year. It was fall. So this was a wonderful sunset, and I looked. As I turned my head back, there was the moon, full moon, coming up over the bluff. At the same time, the sun was going down. And I thought, I can die now. I've seen this most marvelous sight. So that would be something that is maybe not peculiar here, but you can get it here, those wonderful sights
Tremendous
of the
beauty.
bluffs when the sun shines on them. The setting sun shines on those white rock, the white granite. It glows too, and it's just magical.
How would you rank this area among the most beautiful places you've seen around the world?
Oh, certainly not the most beautiful, but let's say from 1 to 10, maybe a 7.
What have you seen prettier? I don't know that I've seen
Yeah.
anything prettier than the bluffs along the Mississippi.
Really, they are. And I was so disappointed when ex-President Carter, I believe it was, or maybe it was, I don't remember which one, I think it was he, that was taking a trip on the Mississippi, and they stopped in Alton, but they went by Chautauqua in the middle of the night. No, they just really didn't know how to do that.
I didn't know. Your experiences with Chautauqua start when you're very young, I understand?
they
Your
did.
father was head of the board when the Air Force Academy considered this area?
Yes, he
Tell me
was.
about some of your early memories of
Um,
Chautauqua.
My earliest were probably in the early 30s.
And you were how old?
And I was a teenager. Now, they go back before that, but we would come on picnics to this area. Then, when I was probably about 13 or 14, we, I belonged to a group called the Campfire Girls. I wasn't a Girl Scout, but and the Campfire Girls would come here in the summer and rent a cottage for a week. And we'd just have a wonderful time. They had, of course, the movies every four times a week. And then a Saturday night were the dances down at and we danced at the pavilion, not the pavilion, at the station, on that area that's now where the ping pong tables, and that was where the dances were. We had lots of course, there was tennis, the swimming pool, and those things that we had. This was a cafeteria, and the play school was a soda shop. So we would stop there. It was called the Midway. And the Yellow Balloon was a grocery store. So all of that went on, and there were many, many people here. It was heavily populated because it wasn't private. So anyone who had come in, there was always a gate and gate people, but anyone who had come in who had the 50 cents or whatever you paid to come in, then used the pool and used the facilities. And so my memory is of a lot more people going in and out of Chautauqua than there are now.
Do you think
and,
those Campfire Girl experiences made you want to have your very own cottage someday?
Well, actually, my parents purchased the cottage that I live in now, and I was delighted when they did that. Yes, it made me feel the flavor of the community. About 1939, they bought the cottage, and I was at that time in my senior year of college. And so I had made friends here. We had rented several times, and there were people my age that I was friendly with. We went down, just as the kids do now, every night to the station, and the station stand. It was even then in existence. And they had the chairs and tables inside the station. There weren't the machines there, so there were chairs and tables inside. We'd go down and sit there and talk, and then decide to either go out in a boat, go up to Grafton to Rubles, which we still do. Back then it wasn't quite as nice as it is. It had gone to a kind of a seedy old hotel thing that was just a tavern, but we would do that. And so yes, those were my first experiences, and they were very, very good.
When you grew up and found the man of your dreams, was he a Chautauquan?
No, he
Yes.
wasn't.
So how did you handle that?
We were both, he had been here too. In fact, he was my boyfriend in high school. So when the Campfire Girls came, he would come and go to the movies with me and go to the dance and that kind of thing. And so he was very used to Chautauqua also.
So it was natural that you
Yes.
two would end up here.
Yes. Hmm. He liked it even better than I think. He was the one who was happy to stay here permanently when we decided to do it.
What year did you do that?
That was 1987, and that was really an accident. We
Get
had
rid of this guy.
I had broken my hip in a fall, was in the hospital in Alton, and we had sold our big home in Edwardsville, which is where we had raised our family and lived, and were renting a townhouse, and thought that was just going to be fine. But the person who owned the townhouse decided to sell it, and the purchaser wanted to live on our side of this. It was a duplex. So Jim came to me in the hospital right after my surgery and said, well,
We have no
we
place
don't have a place to live. And I wasn't in any condition to go looking, and decided we wouldn't find anything nice enough anyway. There, they didn't seem at that time to have anything that was rentable. So we looked at each other after a bit and we said, well, we have Chautauqua. We don't spend more than 3 months in our house in Edwardsville anyway. By the time we're here, at this point we were retired and staying here 6 months out of the year, traveling, going to see our children. And we had, for some unknown reason, had a well drilled, so we had water. And we had a little heat. So we just decided not to worry about finding another place. So we went back and shipped off all the furniture to the children who fortunately wanted it, and got rid of everything, and here we were. That was just accidental, but if you let life happen to you, I guess sometimes it works out, doesn't it? So then, we were.
Good job. A little punctuation.
Right.
That came at the end of a thought. That was good. Tell me about your father's experience on the board and the interest of the Air Force Academy here.
Well, you know that it was, of course, considered, and it was very high on the list. And no one in Chautauqua wanted that Air Force Academy here. Some of the Alton people did, the business people. But at that time, my father was president of the board. And so he talked to the Air Force people when they came here. And I'm not claiming that he had any great influence, but he did speak about the precious place that this was to all these people. And I remember that he said he stood by the admiral, and I can't remember who it was, the Air Force, maybe not admiral, the Air Force general, and said, the man said, I don't see why we would want to spoil a beautiful place like this. So then they chose a place that they did. And that was just really wonderful. The LCIA, I have to tell you this funny story. Maybe you've heard it.
I don't know.
I've told it. The LCIA, and maybe some of the other people you've interviewed have told you about what that is. I don't know.
Yes.
You know what it is anyway. And everyone here does, so we don't need to explain it. But they gave him what I call a loving cup. It was a trophy with the little handles on the outside, a little gold trophy. And it was engraved to Fred Duhadway in gratitude, something like that, this may not be exact, for his saving our precious Chautauqua from the LCIA. Which, if you read it without punctuation, it sounds as if he saved it from the LCIA. And that the first time I saw that, no one else had caught it, but I caught this little funny interpretation of it. So other people think it's funny too.
Just for the record, tell us what the LCIA is.
Well, you know that its name is the Ladies Civic Improvement Association. That was its original name back when it was formed in the early 1900s. And it's our women's association. And they are interested in beautification and cultural things and programs for women and children. So that's their main focus. And they put on events that are fun and that are sometimes beautiful, and they promote the flowers that they have. I remember years ago, after I think I was president, during the celebration of the centennial, and after that, they asked me to become interested in promoting the floral arrangements of Chautauqua, and it was kind of fun then to plan some things and get money from the LCIA to do that. The window boxes, and that just occurred to me. The window boxes that we have now were not put up by my husband, but he did put some up after we came back from a trip to Switzerland and Austria. And of course, those window boxes are so charming. So we put some up on our house, put some up here, and on the play school, and on the Yellow Balloon. They were made of guttering, and so those were the first window boxes on these buildings. And we put some on our house too, and on the Kentucky home. And
I think it looked pretty bare before then, because that's such an
And
important part now.
there really weren't a lot of flowers around the grounds before then. And so then that kind of expanded, and of course we have nicer window boxes now. Eventually, I said to him, we have to take those down, they're pretty tacky, but.
But they got it started.
Yes, they did. Mhm.
You were a teenager when you first came here? You didn't come here as a little tot then.
Well, as a little child, we did come, and we would go swimming. in
As
the
a
pool.
family, you
As a
would-
family, yes.
Well, did you have experience with the rope courts?
Oh,
Did your father or
Oh.
husband get involved with that?
oh, he did.
Oh, tell me
He
about
was the
it.
champion.
Who was this?
Champion rope court play.
Your father or
Yes,
your
my
husband?
father was. My husband played too. But Daddy, and a lot of the men, it was a great diversion for them because they would come from work. The men who lived here in the summer went off to work every day. And so they would come home and they'd go to the rope court and play rope. And Daddy was very good at that. So he could sometimes shoot a whole game without anyone else getting a turn. Once in a while.
How important was that to the social life of the men at Chautauqua, and how did they take care of it, and
Oh, it
how
was-
did women participate?
Oh, women didn't. We watched. The women sat on the benches around and watched, and there was this sign that said, "No women allowed," or, men only, which is still there. And that rope court was kept in beautiful condition, which now it isn't used as much. And of course, the storm, they did have it greatly fixed up during the early part of the season, and then our bad storm destroyed that, so it still hasn't been. There were always people that hired to do that every day. One of the young men in Chautauqua, the boys, dragged that court, smoothed it off, got the white lines on there. That was a daily job that people had, so it was kept up.
Bob Hormel was remembering a Mr. Keene, I think his name was.
Mhm.
Do you remember him too?
Yes, I did.
Can you describe him?
I can't. No, I just remember that he was.
That he was there and
Yes, he was there.
in charge of that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm told that sometimes the men would stay there all evening and dinner would be brought to them.
I didn't know
You don't know about that.
Mother never did that.
Your mother wouldn't
No,
be
and I
the
didn't
type
do
to pack
that.
up lunch and take it to him, huh?
But Bob remembers those things, you see, that I don't remember as well, because he was a kid here.
Right,
He
exactly.
really was. Mhm.
Were you around when they buried the time capsule? Were you part of that
Yes.
event?
Yes, in fact, that monument, I happened to be on the board at the time that they did that, and, no, I was on the LCIA board. The monument was done by a young man from SIU, a sculptor with whom I was acquainted and got in contact with him. And the board agreed to let him be the one to do that monument.
And why did you choose him?
I consulted the head of the art department, and he recommended him as one of the best sculptor students there.
And what
And
would
then
we-
he submitted a design, of course.
What would we find under that monument when we open the time capsule?
I don't remember. I don't.
So you're going to be as surprised as
It
everyone
will,
else?
it will be a surprise to me.
And when will it be opened?
I don't know
Is it
that
100
either.
years, I wonder?
I think so. Yeah, I think it is. That's right. It is.
Probably
So
20.
so it'll be 2085. I'll be long gone, so I won't get to be surprised.
That's great. Thank you, Helen. That is wonderful. That's terrific.
And Curly, the one who's
Sorry.
Curly wanted to, he was more daring than I was. He wanted to float down the river on a mattress.
Oh, he read too much Tom Sawyer, I think.
Well, the funny part about it was his father kind of encouraged him, but he wanted me to go with him. And we were both pretty good swimmers, but we didn't go down the river on the mattress.
I'm good. Can I move this
Yes.
cane just a little
It's
bit?
not in the shop, though.
It wasn't? Okay, well then it's okay.
Okay.
I thought it might not, Well, tell me about your buddy Curly and your adventures.
Well, I don't know whether you're acquainted with Mr. Osborne's book about Chautauqua.
Yes.
But anyway, he spelled their name incorrectly. We both happen to live in the 5800 block of Cates Avenue there in St. Louis. And we were pretty good buddies all year round. But when we came up here, why, we played a lot of tennis together. Curly was a pretty good tennis player. And he used to beat me most of the time. But we still played and got good exercise. And
Tell me
Curly-
about the mattress adventure.
Well, it used to be kind of popular sport to go down the river either in a canoe or on a mattress or something. But Curly suggested we go down on a mattress. And I don't think I even talked to my dad about that because I knew he wouldn't approve of that.
Now, are we talking about an air mattress or a regular bed mattress?
Just a regular bed mattress. They didn't have many air mattresses in those days.
So wouldn't that just get soaked with water and go straight to the bottom?
Yeah, it probably would.
Tell me
Good.
about canoeing on the river. That seems treacherous.
Oh, I always loved that. I used to paddle that canoe up to Marquette State Park almost every afternoon. I'd go swimming and then I'd go down, get in the canoe and paddle up the river. And we'd go around the Slim Island and that's the correct name for it too on the river charts.
What do people call it now?
Well, it should still be called the Slim Island, because that's the way it's charted on the river charts. It's Corps of Engineers, and they don't go over there as much as they used to, but it was the best place to get fishing worms there was. Also a good place to get poison ivy if you weren't careful.
Who would go in this canoe with you?
Well, sometimes I was by myself, but it was always better to have somebody in the bow if you could, because they gave you a counterbalance and you could control it better in the wind that way. And I remember one time I was over there, caught by myself. I paddled around the island and I was coming back to Chautauqua, and a great big turtle stuck its head up beside me. And as soon as it saw me, it ducked down. But there were some big creatures in there. Another time I was paddling with my son, Tom, who lives out in California now. And the fish were jumping pretty far out in the river. And one great big fish came all the way out of the water. I couldn't tell what kind it was because it didn't stay above the surface that long. But there were some big critters out there. And then another time we were up at Campsville, and a Corps of Engineers boat came by and tied up, and it was open to the public. You could go on board. They had a great big catfish in there. It's amazing the size of their mouth on a big catfish, almost as big as a shark when it opens its mouth. So there are some big big creatures out there. And then they say the turtles would sometimes catch you on the foot and drag you down. It never happened to me, but we used to do a lot of, and especially in August, the rivers would get low, the sandbars would come up, and we'd get out to the sandbar as well as we could, either by canoe or by swimming. And you'd run along there, and that's why you have to be so damn careful out there in that river. Why some guys get drowned. You can be running along, the water will be only 6 inches deep up to your feet, and there'll be a drop off there, which is probably 6 feet, 12 feet deep, and you're not accustomed, you don't realize that, and you can't swim against that current out there. At least I couldn't, and not many others in my vintage could either.
Well, it sounds like paradise for a boy. You go fishing and canoeing and
Yeah,
hanging out with your buddies.
yeah, it was pretty much, I thought.
How old?
I was in pretty good shape in those days.
You must have been to canoe all the way up to Marquette. And you enjoyed swimming too?
Oh, yeah,
Did you swim out in that river?
sure we did. Well, when we used to get up here and before the season opened, before the pool was full, we'd swim under the trestle there. The water, especially if it was at flood stage, you would swim under the trestle. And I remember one time we were down there in the spring, and a bunch of us had been swimming under the trestle, where the water was probably 4 or 5 feet deep, and we didn't have any problem. And then the next day we went down there, and we looked over the trestle, and here were about 4 or 5 tremendous big water snakes swimming down there. So we didn't go in that day.
Now, did your parents ever say, "What are you doing out there on that river? It's dangerous."
Well, my mother used to, but my dad didn't seem to worry much.
They just let you go?
Well, we'd usually swim every afternoon, and in those days the pool belonged to a man named Savage, who, I don't know what his business was, but at one time he held the water speed record from New Orleans to St. Louis. He drove a speedboat also, and he owned the pool, and they'd drain it every Monday night. That's before they put in all this apparatus down there to purify the water. And the way they'd drain it would be to just open the drain on a Saturday night or Sunday, and they'd drain it, and then he'd refill it he had a Fordson tractor out there, which had a belt drive on it. He'd run a hose out to the middle of out some distance in the river, and they'd pump water through the hose into the pool there. And by Monday afternoon, it was full again, but it was also full of debris, and the bottom was very slippery. So you'd have to be careful not to slip on the bottom, or you'd get a mouthful. The pool was where it was. There was a different pool there in those days, and they had a slide on it, which has since been removed, and this new pool was built in about the 20s, I believe. It was built inside the old one, and it's a little bit smaller than the original pool there. But anyway, some guys like Cliff Broder and Webb Brainerd, they'd get up on top of the station, and they'd run and dive over the slide into the pool, which was only about 6 feet deep.
Ooh.
It's a wonder they didn't break their cervical spine, but I never heard of anybody suffering a fracture, because that's, of course, results in quadriplegia. And
That would be a tragedy.
and
How old were you when you first came to Chautauqua? Did your parents bring you here?
yeah, we came up. In those days, there used to be a railroad train running up from Alton to Grafton, and it carried, its chief business, I believe, was the American cyanamide, which made gunpowder or dynamite, as I understand it, up there in Franklin, up in the Babs Hollow up there, which is where that Roaring Rivers now is, or Raging River. And in the 20s, the early 20s, they had an explosion there, which killed one man, I believe. But it kept on operating somehow after that. We used to frequently hike over the hills to Elsa, but we didn't very often go up to Grafton. But if you go up over these hills in the wintertime when the foliage is down, you can see some of the old logging trails and the hiking trails. They're still, you can pick them out, but they're not used for that purpose anymore. Elsa used to be a stop for the steamboats that needed to be refueled. Also, the showboats would come down there and stop in Elsa. And I remember seeing the Cat and the Canary one time on a showboat, and they put on such a spectacular performance. I was just a kid, but I was kind of scared. It was a great show.
How old were you then?
I was probably about 6 or 7.
What other memories do you have from being that young, 6 or 7, besides seeing the showboat?
Well, I saw the hotel burn. That was our first summer we were here. That's a hotel down there by Flint Park. Not the Springs Hotel. That was torn down a lot later. Anyway, that was a kind of a popular weekend spot for young couples because they had dances every Saturday night. And but they didn't have the roads. The transportation was a problem. There weren't many automobiles, of course, in those days, but a few people did have automobiles, and a few people had boats. And I remember one time an airplane came up there, and he landed up there in that farmer's field back up at the top of the hill. Mm-hmm. And he was courting some girl who was here. And then when he went to leave, I don't remember who that was, but anyway, he went to leave. He couldn't take off. The wheat was right under his wing. He couldn't get any lift, and he'd go back and forth over that field. He finally did get off, I believe. And then I think the story I heard was he had to pay the farmer for his crop because he ruined his wheat crop.
Did he get the girl?
I don't know about that.
Now when you see little boys the age you were when you first came here, all the little boys love to go out and play in the creek and hike
that
around.
was part of growing up.
Tell me
And
about
Timmy there, he loved the creek too.
What about you?
I don't remember that I played in the creek so much, but the Springs Hotel used to be on the other side of these buildings. I don't know whether you knew it or not, but then they had a playground for the kids there. They had a wading pool, which wasn't a very good place for it, but the little kids have always enjoyed that creek. And when Tim was young, we have some in-laws that lived up in Mount Sterling, Illinois, and they gave Tim some ducks, 2 ducks, that he used to put in the creek and play with them. But he outgrew that, unfortunately. But he had a good time with that.
What happened to the ducks?
We finally had to give them to Mrs. They kind of got to be a nuisance. And we gave them to a lady who had I don't know whether you called it an estate or a farm or something out Highway 40. Mrs. D. I don't remember their last name. Anyway, she had a pond on her farm, or on her property, and went right past, Highway 40 went right past it, and we gave them to her, and I think one of them got killed by something or other. but the ducks were quite a nuisance. They became a nuisance.
Oh, they do, they do. Tell me about your cottage. How many families, how many years have you had your cottage?
Well, we've only had this cottage, we used to rent cottages for 2 weeks at a time, which was what most people did. And we lived in various cottages. I guess we lived in 5 or 6 of them when I was growing up. Sometimes we'd just rent for 2 weeks, and my mother had to pack trunks. And there was no laundry facilities, and so you had to pack your clothes that you were going to wear for the next 2 weeks. There weren't many bath facilities either. I think my dad put in the first bathtub up that cottage at Joe Meisel's now. There was no running water. You had to get your water out of the spring. And everybody drank the spring water. You had a bucket, and you dip down in and take your bucket home before it got too hot, and serve the family the water. So we lived in various cottages for just 2-week periods at a time. We rented them.
Well, that sounds pretty rough. You didn't have running water, you didn't have a bathroom, you didn't have electricity. Why would anybody want to come?
Well, I guess because of these other attractions which I was telling you about. Yeah, they had a Delco machine down in that building back there, I believe, which ran on a gasoline motor. And that's the way they generated electricity for the movies and for anything else. They didn't have street lights either. So in spite of that, people endured them and enjoyed it. The nights were always cool here. Might be real hot in the city, but somehow or other some of the businessmen would get up here at night to go to sleep, and then they'd freeze up here at night. Because it usually got pretty cold. You could feel the air, cold air, flowing down through the valley.
This place has been hosting families for well over 100 years. Why do you think it endures?
Well, for just the same causes I was mentioning. I got here after the Piasa bird. I had a picture of the Piasa bird. I never saw that in flight, but according to legend, it was in flight. And I don't know whether you're acquainted with Miss Clifford's book or not, but Mrs. Clifford was a storyteller, and we used to enjoy going up to the auditorium and on a Saturday morning, and she'd tell stories to the kids. And that's where I heard about the Two Deer Spring, which was a name she assigned to that. It also goes by other names, I believe. This spring right here I'm talking about. That was what the community was dependent on for water. There's another spring way back up Springfield, about half a mile, which is fun to go to in the fall or winter when there's not so much foliage out. And sometime if you want to take a hike, why, just follow the creek up Springfield past the last cottage, and about half a mile up there's another spring which flows pretty good. And a lot of people don't even know it's there. But
How much longer do you think Chautauqua will be here and families will be coming
well,
here?
I'm a little bit worried about the commercialization of this side of the river. Now, you don't see it on the Missouri side, but this is a beautiful spot as far as the country is concerned. And Rubel's Hotel is, of course, expanding, and then there's that home up on top of the bluff there. They bought it because of the scenery according to that newspaper article, and it's a beautiful scene up there. You might want to see if you could get the Adams family to take you up on top of that bluff, and if you have some binoculars, you can look over and see Smartfield and some of those other buildings. I think that was an auxiliary field during the war, but sometimes that Confederate Air Force would come in here and base themselves over there. I don't think they've been back here for a couple of years, but I saw them on television just about 2 nights ago. I think they were down someplace in the south. Anyway, they've still got a B-17 and a B-29, and I'm sure they're expensive to maintain.
Yeah, I imagine. What about your cottage? Tell me about how long you've had it and what it means
Well-
to you. What do you call your cottage?
We call it Laughing Place from Uncle Remus, but I guess that's a bad selection, because Uncle Remus fell into disrepute.
But many of us enjoyed those stories.
Anyway, we bought that from the, Wimmers. Mr. Wimmer was a builder from East St. Louis, and I understand he built a good many of the houses down along Millionaires Row there at the top of outside of Alton, where the Levises and the people who owned the glassworks built. And Mr. Wimmer was a good friend of the Beckwiths. The Beckwiths used to come up here, and there's still some Beckwiths here. And Paul, one of the boys who's dead now, he was a little older than I am. He knew the Wimmer family real well, and he said that Mr. Wimmer built that with excess lumber, which he had bought for some of these big homes on the top of the bluff in Alton. And that's why our living room up here is filled with, I think that's cypress. We bought that after the war, because when I got back out of the service, which was in 1945, I was married and we had 2 kids, and my wife was an ocean in the Army, and we got along real good together. And she was 6 years younger than me, and I never thought I would live her. Anyway, she died 4 years ago, and we were hunting for a home after the war was over. And fortunately, my dad was tolerant enough to let us stay in with him. We had a big house and cabiny place, and Dad let us use his 3rd floor. So that's where the 2 kids, 2 youngest were born, 2 oldest. And the house stayed in the family for about 50 years, I believe. And we didn't have any other place to go, and I didn't have enough money to buy a new house. So anyway, we lived. Dad let us stay there for, I think we were with him about 4 years until I could get a house built in University City. Then we built a house in, we built a house there off of Del Mar on the north side of Oakbrook. It was Oakbrook Forest, and there were a lot of other young couples there. They were developing that subdivision, and the Dees lived right in back of us, and then the Hardys were next to them. And there were a lot of families there who were just getting out of the service, and all their families were expanding. And so anyway, we sent the first 2 kids to cottage camp, which was out off of Mason Road. And Sue and Richard went there. And then the kids Sue was singing with the night, with the, the carolers. And so we knew about Camp Minnewanka. And so we were spending about as much money to send them to Camp Minnewanka for 6 months or 6 weeks in the summer as it would have cost to stay up here. And so we decided to buy a cottage up here, and so they were getting about the same benefits up here, I think, as they were at home.
And how many children did you have altogether?
We have 6 altogether.
So you raised 6 children here.
Yeah. They've been pretty good kids.
Was your, did you introduce your wife to Chautauqua, or did she?
Yeah, we came up when we were still courting.
What'd she think of it?
Well, she liked it. She was from Jacksonville, Illinois, and
How important do you think Chautauqua was in raising your family?
oh, we think it was real important. It gave us a lot of things that they didn't have, which they weren't getting at camp, and although,
Such as?
and the cost was about the same anyway, and they all liked it. And now, Chris is my younger daughter. She plays a harp in Atlanta, and under the name of, she and her husband are both professional musicians, and they play under the name of, let me see, Gentle Rain, and they're pretty busy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ever get to Atlanta, you can call Chris up.
Right. I think I heard her play the harp here one time. Didn't she give a concert
Maybe so,
here?
yeah, she played here a couple of times.
I think so.
Anyway,
So what has Chautauqua contributed to your life? How has it made your life
I
different?
think it's been a great recreational spot. And I don't go for religion like some of them do. It's not, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter what the religion is. But I guess some people like to think of it as a religious environment, but it's not, to me, it never has really been a religious item. Like they started out, I believe, I think many of the Chautauquas started out as kind of quasi-religious items, but I heard Billy Sunday once at the Hotel Jefferson there in St. Louis years ago. My dad took us. And I visited at the former Chautauqua down in Tennessee. Let's see, what do you call that? I've forgotten the name of that.
I don't know.
And my oldest son, Richard, he lives in New York. Really good launching place there. And so we kind of dropped it after Richard moved away.
Would you like a sip of water?
Why?
Would you like a sip of water?
I don't think so. I'm not
No?
too dry
You're
yet.
okay? All right. That's okay. Well, tell me what part Chautauqua played in your life in forming you as a person and as a father.
Oh, I think it served as a good recreational background. And in general, the people are very nice. There's not too much cutthroat.
Well, what about the religion? You say the religion part was not very important to you.
No,
Do you like the nature?
yeah. And you could climb over the bluffs if you wanted to. There's not much of that anymore either. We used to hike over the bluffs to Elsa frequently. And where that Elsa Landing restaurant used to be, there was originally an ice cream parlor there named Spats. And Tom Morfitt, who kept horses here, he kept a string of about 12 horses up there at the back gate. He'd have to take them in to get them shod every once in a while, and there was a blacksmith at Elsa. And if you could save up $1, you could ride one of his horses over the bluff to Elsa to get the horse shod. And Tom would he kept the horses at Western Military Academy, and he'd treat you to an ice cream sundae.
So now, let me get this right. You paid him to take his horse over and get it shod?
Yeah. Well, it was a good deal. Usually you'd charge $1 an hour for riding his horse. And then if the horses had to be shod, he'd wait till about 4 or 5 of them needed to have new shoes. And he'd get the group together, and you pay him $1, and you'd get the horseback ride plus the ice cream sundae at Elsa. And I don't think there's ever been any better ice cream sundaes than those cherry sundaes they used to serve down there at Spats. And that's a thing of the past, too.
Right. Do you remember getting in any mischief around here?
No, I don't remember any mischief, any serious mischief. There was always one bad boy on the grounds, though. The one I remember the most was the son of one of the directors named, let me see, well, I can't think of his name now. Murphy, I think, Murray, Bobby Murray. Seemed like he was always in trouble.
What kind of trouble would he get
Oh,
into?
I don't know, he'd move the croquet balls or something like that.
Here's a little
Oh, thank you.
Kleenex for you. It's actually paper napkins can be a little rough.
Yeah,
So you never got in any trouble?
what?
You never got in any trouble?
Not that I know of.
What about your boys?
The boys, no, they didn't get in any trouble. They weren't troublemakers.
I just mean little fun things, not trouble.
Yeah,
Nope. Do you see any romances go on here?
oh yeah, a lot of romances.
Tell me.
Well, when we were past high school age, I guess, and I had two cousins who lived in Tyler, Texas. One of them was named Boo. She was my sister's age, who was 2 years older than me. The other one was named Helen, who was about my age. And there were, of course, a lot of other young folks here in different groups, and Boo and my sister hung out around the sub-20 age group, and they used to swim down there at that pool, and one time they roughhoused her a little bit, and somebody pushed Boo in the pool, and she scraped her toe against the edge of the pool and avulsed the nail. And of course, that was a bad wound in those days, 'cause
Sure.
we didn't have automobiles or anything like that, not many at least. And they didn't know how to transport Boo back to first aid. So they went and got one of Mr. Morfitt's horses and put her in the saddle. And I think my grandmother was with us then. Anyway, Boo got her toe straightened up. And I mean, she got her toe dressed. And it wasn't a major injury, but they did roughhouse there at the pool sometimes, and there was a rougher concrete surrounding it.
That would do it.
Well, Boo had a boyfriend here from St. Louis, and I didn't realize it was a real serious affair, but about 2 years ago, I received a telephone call one night, and it was one of Boo's kids wanting to know how she could get in touch with Alfred Kissack, who was one of the boys up here. And I hadn't heard of Al for some time, but they lived on Westminster, just west of Devoliver, I believe. And there was Al and his sister. His sister was very vivacious, Jane. I remember her better. I think they had moved to Canada, but I lost track of them. Anyway, Boo's husband had died and left her with a good deal of Texas wealth, I believe. And she was thinking again about Alfred. And they called me one night how she could get in touch with Alfred. And I didn't know. I'd lost track of him completely. But I suggested to her she could write to Washington U Alumni Office. And I think maybe like most of the rest of us, if she went to college, if he went to college, he went to Washington U. And so I suggested to her she write to Washington U Alumni Office. And I never heard whether she did or not. And I don't know what happened to the Texas oil money.
That was an old
Anyway,
romance.
that was the one romance that worked out all right, I believe.
That's great. I think we're wrapped up. That's good. So 80 years later, she's still thinking about this guy?